Good afternoon, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Exodus, and we are now in chapter 18. Chapter 18 begins, as usual, we have the word and this is really and then. Now, we know that it happened after chapter 17, but we don't know exactly how long after chapter 17 that chapter 18 took place. Now, in this case, chapter 18 is about this particular incident that Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father in law, heard of all that God has done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now, let's begin to dwell on this just a little bit so that we understand that chapter 18, and we will get clearer by the time we reach the middle part of chapter 18, that chapter 18 is not in a chronological order after chapter 17. Chapter 18 happened a little later, probably at the time of the book of Numbers, when they were about to leave Mount Sinai. And Jethro, and Jethro being the father in law of Moses, remember, Jethro actually has other names. We read of him as Ruel, Ruel. We will read of him of Yether, and a number of others, Jethro being one of them. And the background that we have would be in the early part of Exodus in chapter 4. Uh, in chapter 2, right? And in chapter 2 to chapter 4 gives us that background of his early life when he left the palace and then he went to Midian. And we said Midian is actually a place which is northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And he met a bunch of sisters there, and Midian, the priest of Midian, being Jethro, allowed Moses to marry Zipporah. Now, this word priest, please bear in mind that it is not basically just religious. The priest also means a chief ruler. And so Jethro is a chief ruler in the area of Midian. So it's very powerful. And he had heard. Now, remember, I said that this would be framed after the Exodus, and about the time they were about to leave Mount Sinai, that would be about a year down the road. He heard what God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord Jehovah had brought Israel out of Egypt. Please bear in mind that at this time you will find that Jethro or Ruel or Yether, he would have been what we call a ger. A ger is one who has embraced the God of Israel, the nation of Israel, and being very willing to have his daughter to be a part of Moses' life. In chapter 4, this one is in Exodus chapter 4, we find a very interesting passage where Moses apparently sent away. So he says here, and then Jethro, Moses' father in law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back with her two sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a ger in a foreign land. So remember the word Gershom, ger, a stranger, and this is ger, a stranger. But in this case, it would be Jethro, uh, not a native of Israel, but a stranger of Israel, joined Israel and joined Moses and knows Jehovah. We read of Jethro being very familiar now with Jehovah and had served Jehovah as God, and he comes to visit. So that would be a backdrop of this chapter. And also note this, that when Moses was going to Egypt again after getting married, uh, it would have been quite inappropriate to bring Zipporah and the little children because they were about to set the people free. A lot of work needs to be done, and Moses was not about to be entangled. And so Moses actually sent her back to Jethro for safekeeping, not sent her back in the idea of divorce. So be aware that this idea of send her away does carry an idea of a divorce, but it is not true in this case. It is literally sending her back for protection, for her own good. And now that everything is okay, they are at Mount Sinai, and Jethro brought Zipporah and the sons Gershom, and the other name was Eliezer, for he had said, "The God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh." Now, Eliezer literally means El is my help. That's the idea. El is the one who helps me. That's the name of El Eliezer. Eliezer. And then it says here, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness. This is giving the backdrop that Moses is now about to leave Mount Sinai. And that idea is in the book of Numbers. And we have Jethro, Zipporah, and two sons. And here the Israelites were about to leave. And they came from Midian. Now understand that this is where they are, where he had encamped at the mountain of God. And that would be Sinai, right? That would be Sinai. And that would also be Horeb. In chapter 17, they were not at Sinai just yet. Now, where were they? If you remember, they were in Rephidim. Before they were at Rephidim, and they had an encounter with the Amalekites, the Amalek. And they asked for water, and Moses went to the front of Mount Sinai, and water came out from the rock he struck, and it flowed all the way to Rephidim, not that far away. Now, this is not at Rephidim, this is now at Mount Sinai. Now, we need to understand in chapter 19, only then they are told that they came to Mount Sinai. So chapter 18 is really a chapter out of place, if you want to call it that way. Now he had said to Moses, "I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons with her." So think of it this way. This message here, "I, your father-in-law, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons," is sent via a messenger, which means that they are not there yet, and they send somebody ahead to inform Moses that they are on the way. Verse 7. Verse 7, again, this word so is really and then. After the messenger brought the message to Moses, Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. So you can see that, right? It is a messenger having sent a message to Moses to inform about Jethro and the wife and the two sons. After Moses received it, and then Moses went out from Mount Sinai, and he would go and meet with Jethro. Next, he bowed down. This is the same word where it's commonly translated as worship, but bow down is very good. It caused himself to bow down because in the old days, you would find that we have the the smaller the smaller bowing down to the greater. And so you find this would be Moses, and then this would be Jethro. This particular posture is really of humbling oneself to someone greater, paying homage. It's not worshiping a god or anything like that. So we shouldn't be too preoccupied with translating this word to be worship. There's no such word as worship. It's to cause himself to bow down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well being. That would be very much how Eastern Oriental people would come together and ask about their, since we haven't seen each other for a while, how they were doing. They went into the tent, and then that would be Moses' tent, right? Moses' tent would be the place where they would be meeting. After this, so we can see in verse 8, and then they this must be in the tent. And then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how Jehovah had delivered them. So Jethro heard, and Jethro would have heard the rumors. Now he hears it from the horse's mouth that the person who has been there, instrumentally used by God, and the reaction of Jethro was this. And then Jethro rejoiced all the good which the Lord had done for Israel. Remember the idea of good in verse 9. What is good? Tova. It's seen from the eyes of Israel. And everything that God had done was good for them. He had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. And as a response, and then Jethro said, Blessed be Jehovah, who has delivered you out of the hand of Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. For in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them. So you can see this as a testimony. Now I know. What do you mean that now I know? He has heard, but hearing doesn't mean that you actually can trust what you hear. So knowledge is all about observation and experience. Hearing from Moses, right? Moses told his father-in-law, and having heard from Moses, that becomes Jethro's experience, first-hand knowledge. And he realizes and blesses God that Jehovah is greater than all the gods. Verse 11 says, all the gods, it means all the Elohim. For in the very thing that they behave proudly, and this idea of behave proudly literally means to be arrogant. All the Elohims tries to think that they are big, they are great, but no, Jehovah is above them. That is the way that is expressed, that he was greater than all of them. He came upon them. That would be the idea, that Elohim, Jehovah, is on top of all the gods. Now, why is that so? Because the gods of Egypt would be the ones that Pharaoh and the Egyptians would depend on. And after hearing everything that Jehovah did, the 10 plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, the destroying of the army of Pharaoh, then his conclusion is, yes, Jehovah is far greater than all of them. We continue in verse 12. And then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, he did this. He burned an olah, a burnt offering. And then other sacrifices. This is literally other sacrifices. This is likely to be a shalamim, a peace offering. And these are allowable for non-Israel, right? Non-Israel. Why? Because the non-Israelite is not the same as Israelites. They would give a thanksgiving and to give offerings to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses, father-in-law, before God. Why? Because remember, when it is said to be before God, there is no tabernacle. So what do you mean by before God? It would be in Mount Sinai, at the foot of Mount Sinai, God's mountain, and his tent was there right underneath Mount Sinai. And that is what it means by before God. Then we have Aaron, the brother, all the elders of Israel. So remember, elders would be the older people of the tribes where they had elected to be leaders. They came to eat bread. Now, this is an interesting expression. This would be ekal lechem, to eat bread. I guess this is commonplace. Why eat bread is because that's the staple. Obviously, if they were Chinese, they would be eating rice. But since they are all Hebrew people in that region, the staple is bread. And so they ate bread in that sense. Now comes verse 13. And then something happened when Jethro was there. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, it is another reflection of what happened in this chapter. And so you find that this chapter appears in two places. It is important for us to remember, and in verse 17, that is a very brief description of this entire chapter. It was what Jethro did. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. People just keep bringing issues to Moses. And can you imagine, there are like 1 million people there. Everybody has problems with everybody else. And the people stood before Moses from morning till evening. He said, got no time to do anything else. And verse 14, and then Moses' father-in-law saw, all very visual, all that he did for the people. And he said, what is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit and all these people stand before you from morning to evening? Why are you doing it all by yourself? And then verse 15. And then Moses replied his father-in-law. He says, because the people come to me to inquire of God. He wants to know what God would do when they have a difficulty. 16. The idea here, if they have an issue, this word difficulty is an issue. If they have a problem, they come to me and I judge between one another. And I make known the statutes of God and his laws. Now, how would Moses know? This is another clue that Moses is using statutes of God and his laws. The idea of laws here would be Torah, is Torah or Torot. It's plural. The statutes of God or the hook, both of these were given at Mount Sinai. So in that 1 year, Moses received a lot of Torah and a lot of statutes. And so as the people came, this would be a state of after Moses had received the statutes and the Torah, not before. In chapter 18, chronologically speaking, they were at Rephidim. They're about to go to Mount Sinai. They haven't arrived at Mount Sinai yet. But here it assumes that it's already received. And so this is a clue also to tell us that Moses had already been at Mount Sinai for a while. Verse 17. And then Moses' father-in-law said to him, well, the thing that you are doing is not good, not tov. It is not working out. It's not expedient. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. You keep doing this and you will drop dead. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. The group is no longer a family. The group is thousands and hundreds of thousands and 1 million over people. So Jethro says this, now hear my voice and I will give you counsel. Now 19 tells us that Jethro is saying, I will advise you. I will advise you, and God will be with you. When it says God will be with you, this word is Elohim, as in Genesis chapter 1. The name of God is Elohim. The general noun is used on idols and false gods, but by itself, we can see that Elohim is used in a third person. Elohim, he will be with you. And so this is the name of God, just as in Genesis. Now Jethro tells him this, stand before God and for the people so that you may bring the problems to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws. Again, the statutes and the laws are already collected at Mount Sinai. So this has to be after. And show them the way in which they must walk and by the work which they must do. This is the advice that Jethro is saying. When you teach them the statutes and laws, you must also teach them how to walk in it. Now, this idea of walk in it, please be aware that this is about the conduct. When you walk, you show how your life is. You're walking around demonstrating your choices. Which step you're going to take. Left, right, the next step, and the steps following. Each step is a decision, a judgment to be made. And so they must be governed by the statutes and the laws that God gave. And so the things that they must do and the way they conduct themselves with their decisions, you have to teach them. The idea of teach them is to cause them to be admonished, right? Cause to cause to warn that if they don't do the statutes and Torah of God, then they will face the judgment of God. So this word teach is not the usual word for teach. It is a more serious word that if you don't do it, be aware God is going to do something. Verse 21. In verse 21, now it demonstrates some of the wisdom that Jethro has. Now remember, Jethro is the father-in-law. Jethro is a Ger. Jethro is one who was not a native of Israel, not a Hebrew, but have embraced the God of Moses and has lots of wisdom. And perhaps he has gained wisdom even from God. And so it says, moreover, you shall select from all the people able men. Now, the word able men are people with power, with ability. Smart people, you want to call it, right? And then it says here, these are people who fear God. And so as a Ger, he also knows Ecclesiastes kind of instruction. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is man's all. So in Jethro's mind, they must fear God, be afraid of God, so they would do everything very carefully. They are men of truth, not of lies. They hate covetousness. Covetousness means they cannot be bought. They hate to have unlawful gains. What does that mean? They cannot be bought. They cannot be bribed. Now, these are the men. Fear God, men of truth, hates covetousness. And you are going to place over them to be rulers of 1,000 people, rulers of hundreds of people, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And so the idea here is to build a pyramid of order. And the pyramid of order allows each to take place before it ever reaches Moses. Let them judge the people at all times. Then you can do more effective. Then it will be that every great matter that they bring to you, but every small matter they themselves will judge. What does that mean? It means that if there are issues that they can't do, they will bring it up. Only when they are major. The minor is all settled amongst themselves. And so it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. Now, the idea of bear the burden is implied. Moses have to do this, but now you've got more people to shoulder the responsibility. If you do this thing and God commands you, then you will be able to persevere, and all these people will also go to their place in peace. Now, this word in peace has an important implication. In peace is shalom. Remember, shalom comes from the word shalem. Shalem means to complete what needs to be done. If you complete what needs to be done, then you will have shalom. And so for all the issues that they bring up, and if they can resolve their issues, then they can go home in shalom. That is what this passage actually says. To give shalom to everyone, follow a pyramid model of management. And only important things come to you. You don't need to see everything. Trust your people. Now, why do you trust the people? Because they are men of ability. And these men of ability is because they fear God. They are men of truth. They stand for truth. They are very important because they would not look for the easy way out. They want to resolve things based on facts. C is they are not easily bought. So you can't pay money to them and then they will judge for you. And then after you have found these three characteristics, they are called able men. And they will be able to give the people shalom because they can shalom their problems. Verse 24. So, and then Moses heard or obeyed the sound or voice of the father-in-law, and then made all the changes he had said. Verse 25. And then Moses examined to choose able men out of all Israel. Means that they don't care where you come from, as long as you fear God, you are men of truth, you hate covetousness, you are able men, and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, rulers of tens. And then they judge the people at all times. The hard cases, now this idea of hard means they are serious cases. The major problems they brought to Moses, but they judge every small case themselves. After this was successfully implemented, in verse 27, the word here is then would be and then. Moses let his father-in-law depart. Now understand this word let. It is he sent away his father-in-law. That is what it means. And he walked on his way to his own land. And at this point in time, you find that he is going back to Midian, which is, I think, not too far away because Sinai is at the edge of Midian in Exodus chapter 3, where Moses saw the burning bush. And this time round, the wife and the two sons stayed with Moses because the problems are already over in Egypt and they are traveling to the promised land. And with this, we need to remind ourselves that this is not a chapter in this chronology. It is a chapter that is in Numbers, early part of Numbers. It is a revision in Deuteronomy chapter 1. And this is to take the mind away from the Amaleks or the Amalekites and tell them that this is an issue that Moses needs to deal with, but it is always at a time where Moses already received the statutes and the Torah of God. And so with this, we come to the end of our chapter today.